And so next we welcome Guillaume.
So hi everyone, my name is Guillaume, and today I'm going to talk about Llama. So the first language model that was released by Meta in February 2023. So I'm going to very briefly summarize the motivation and the background at the time, so why we built Llama. Then I will talk a bit about some technical details like the training data we used, the architecture of the model, quickly talk about how we evaluate this model, then present some results, draw some conclusion, and then very briefly talk about Mistral, which is now our company. Yeah, so the project started in August 2022 at Meta. It was at the beginning a team of 5 people working from different projects. And the reason that we basically decided to work together on Llama is because it's very difficult today if you work in natural language processing to actually work without LLM. So it doesn't matter what you do, whether it is machine translation, summarization, any task typically. And in our case, we were working on trying to solve mathematical problems using deep learning. And we were doing this, it's essentially an NLP problem, the way you frame it. And it's very difficult to do this without LLMs. So we basically decided that we had to train one because at the time, there were no really good open source models. There were some, but they were very, very far from the model of OpenAI. So we played a bit with the codex, the model from OpenAI. There was an API, but it was very expensive. And it's also a model we wanted to actually be able to query much faster than what we could do with the API. So we thought that if we want to remain competitive, we need to actually build these models. So the first question that you have to answer when you build such model is basically how large is going to be your model, what is the size. So typically GPT-3 was a 175 billion parameter model. Then Gopher by DeepMind was 280 billion. Then there was this model by Google, Lambda, that was a bit smaller than GPT-3. And then there was this huge model released by NVIDIA, so MT-NLG. And then there was this very interesting paper by DeepMind, Chinchilla, on what they saw. So what they showed is that you can actually train state-of-the-art models that are actually much smaller than what people typically use in LLMs. In particular, they showed that with 70 billion parameters, you can actually have a state-of-the-art model. And what they did is that they actually, the difference was not the architecture or anything. There were some small differences, but mainly it's simply that they trained the model 5 times longer than the predecessors. So typically, GPT-3 was trained on 300 billion parameters, yeah? No, sorry, tokens. And the Chinchilla was trained on 1.4 trillion tokens. So the question that was addressed in the paper is typically the following. So if you have a compute budget, so for instance, let's say you have 1,000 GPU for 1 month, and you want to train the best possible model, so what should you do? Should you train a 100 billion parameter model on this many tokens? Or maybe should you train a twice smaller model but on twice as many tokens? Or do you want to train a larger model on less tokens? So it was essentially answering this question and telling you what is the ideal number of tokens for each model size. And typically the previous ones were clearly under-trained, and it was showing that you have to train it much more than what people typically do. So there are many benefits when you train smaller models. So simply it's easier, you have less instabilities, the model doesn't explode. In terms of engineering, you don't have to, you don't need as many GPUs. It's faster to train. Inference is also much faster. You can make inference on just one node or potentially just a few GPUs. So everything is, life is just easier. And then if you want to use it for research, you can generate sentences and decode sequences much faster. So we decided that we will actually train several models. So 4 models, so the 7, 13, 33, and 65 billion parameter models that we at the end released. So the 2 first one will be trained on 1 trillion tokens, and the 2 largest one on 1.4 trillion tokens. So when I talk about tokens, so very briefly, so a token is essentially just a word. The idea is that if you have a sentence, you want to cut it into some sub-words that you can feed into your model. And the tokens are essentially some sub-word units. So typically if you have a sentence like how are you, so that these words are common, so each word will actually have a token. If you have some less common words, like the second example, here these words are not very common in your training set, so you will actually split them into subwords. And the very nice thing about this is that you can actually tokenize any basically sequence of text, even if it's code, for instance, you can actually tokenize this using the same vocabulary. And you don't have this issue of unknown words, so whenever you have some word you have never seen before, it's simple, you just cut it into smaller pieces recursively until all the subwords you have, I mean, up to the letter, the character level, are known. So when this paper came out, the paper that presented this, it was kind of a revolution because it basically solved this question of what to do with unknown words in basically just one trick. So it was actually extremely convenient, and nobody, I mean, today everybody is using this. So for the data, so as I said, we need to find 1.4 trillion tokens, so it's not easy to find. So to put this number in perspective, you can look at Wikipedia, for instance. So in English on Wikipedia, you have 6 billion tokens. You have a bit less than half than this in French, so a bit less than 3 billion tokens. And if you look at the top 20 languages, so the Wikipedia languages with the highest corpora, for all the alphabets that are either in Latin or Cyrillic, so Latin and Cyrillic alphabets, you have 27 billion tokens. So at the end, you need to find 50 times more tokens than this, and there are not so many corpora like this on the internet, so Wikipedia is one. You have a few others. One is archive, so on archive you have 2 million publications, so it's 35 billion tokens. You have Stack Exchange, which is a collection of websites. Stack Overflow is the most famous one, also the largest among all of these. It's 26 billion tokens. On GitHub, you have a lot of data on GitHub, between half a trillion and 1 trillion token based on how much you decide to be aggressive on your data cleaning and data processing, and if you want to remove the files that do not seem interesting, or based on the extensions also you want to consider. But the largest one is by far Common Crawl. So Common Crawl at the end was more than 80% of our data. So Common Crawl is essentially 240 billion pages from the internet that have been collected over more than 15 years, 16 years. And interestingly, what we found is that the internet over this last 16 years is actually much, much larger than if you were to just crawl internet today. We thought that just if you were to crawl the internet today, most websites will be there, but actually, there are more websites today than before as well. But actually, you will actually have way less data than if you use this historical data collected over 16 years. So it's a huge data set. The raw data is, I think, maybe 6 petabytes, so it's really huge. So it's huge, but it's also, as a consequence, not easy to process, and it's very noisy. You have a lot of noise, a lot of data you don't want to use on the internet to train your model. On each web page is provided in two formats, so either HTML, so the raw HTML, the same thing you have when you are on your browser and look at the source of the page, and you have also a processed version that they give, which is, they extract the text of the page, but it's typically not really well done because you have still all the menu, all the the things about the banner, the cookies, warnings, everything, the copyrights at the bottom. So all this information is not useful to train your model, but it's still there. So you want to remove this, but it's easier to do it if you have the source, because typically if you have the HTML page, you can. People will use this navigation HTML5 tag, so it's easy to remove the noise. So we actually reprocessed everything from the raw HTML. So then there are many things you want to do. First of all, you want to filter the URLs. For instance, remove the websites that are potentially harmful, that have either some hate content or porn content as well. You also want to filter the languages. So in particular, in our case, we just wanted the English content. Then you want to remove the duplicates. There are many web pages that appear hundreds of times or potentially thousands of times, even more. You want to remove at the line level the lines that appear multiple times. So yeah. Plus the noise removal, and at the end we had some quality filter. So the point of the quality filter is to remove the pages that, even if they look very clean and properly formatted and everything, there is actually not much interesting content on it. So you can train some classifiers on what you think is interesting. For instance, let's say Wikipedia, and you can say that some negative samples are some random pages, and then you have kind of a classifier that will say this page looks good, this one doesn't, and you can actually filter out. Actually, at the end, I think it's 90% of the pages that we remove. And yeah, so if you do this, at the end you have around, that depends how aggressive you are on your filter again, but you can have trillions of tokens, so there is really no limit. Yeah. So this was the final data mixture we had for Llama 1. So the Common Crawl, we had two versions. So one is CCNet that was processed by people at Meta a bit before us, and then there was C4, which was the same version but by Google. So we used the two because, adding C4 for us was one way to have more tokens, because it was difficult to find this 1.4 trillion token. At the end, I think basically all our data together was pretty much the final size, so we didn't have a lot of extra, except for the code, but we didn't want to use much more code than what people typically used to train these models. Yeah, on the last two that I didn't mention were the books. So we use books from two collections. One was Gutenberg, so it's a collection of books from the public domain. And one was Books 3, which is a data set of books that was released by some other company. So interestingly, there are very few differences between the final architecture of model today, the best model open source you can find, on the original version published in 2017. So even though there has been like many, probably hundreds of variations of transformer proposed, really there is nothing that really stands out, except for us, what we found to be actually interesting was this rotary embeddings, which is an improvement over the initial positional embeddings of the Vasmani paper, plus the Swiglu activation, which is a replacement for the ReLU in the Eurofit forward activation. So yeah. Plus, we initialize the weight differently, doing something similar to Palm, a paper by Google before. And yeah. So for all the models, as the model was becoming bigger, we basically try to increase both the dimensionality and the number of layers as we wanted the model to be larger. Yeah, and for the largest model, we took the exact same architecture as the Chinchilla model of DeepMind. It was supposed to be 70, but for us it was 65 billion. I don't know, they found some extra tokens, some parameters somewhere, but yeah. So these are the training curves we obtained. Surprisingly, and it was a nice surprise to us, but there were very few instabilities. We were afraid that, we had heard stories about how horrible it is to train this model, like everything crashes, the model, the loss goes to infinity, you have some nans everywhere, but it was actually, it actually went very, there was no issue. The loss actually were pretty smooth, as you can see. The Llama 7B was trained on 500 GPU for 1 week. On the largest model, the Llama 65B was trained on, so theoretically it should have been 3 weeks. If with the code base we had, it would have been 3 weeks on 2000 A100s. But there were a lot of hardware failures. So that's kind of an issue with this GPU, is that even though they are fast, they are very unstable. Sometimes they crash, you don't really know why. Sometimes you have some communication that doesn't go through. You have the model that just stops training, it doesn't tell you why. I think the worst issue we had was that sometimes when you, some GPU, and when they do some matrix multiplication, they will actually give you some corrupted outputs. So they will just multiply 2 matrices, give you something wrong, and silently, and you don't even know why. It doesn't say any warnings, just it's wrong. And then you actually see some extremely, you see some spikes. So this is actually the only times we saw some loss diverging. But then when this happens, it means the GPU has an issue, and then the loss goes wild very, very quickly, so it's easy to spot. Sometimes it's a bit more difficult to spot the GPU that was responsible. If you have 2000 GPU, you have to figure out which one was bad and then start on another one. But that was, I think, the most difficult thing of these trainings, to actually figure out what was the defectors hardware. So it should have been 3 weeks, but then it was 4 weeks because of these reasons. Yeah. Yeah, and also some other thing we didn't mention in the paper or anywhere is that to actually accelerate the training, we had some tricks where we manually recomputed the gradients of the backward function of the training. And the idea was that we wanted to make some optimization, so we wanted to overlap as much as possible the communication between the GPU. So typically what you do is that if you have 65 billion parameters, it doesn't fit on one GPU. So what you do is that you cut your model into shards. So if you have 1000 GPU, you have 1000 pieces. Each GPU will actually take care of 1,000th of the model. And what you do is that whenever you forward a sequence, each layer will actually gather the rest of the parameter of the layer all across the network. So every time you go through a layer, each GPU will fetch the remaining parameter over the 1000th GPU, compute the next layer, then forget the weights. And so you do this to actually be able to train these models even though they don't fit on one GPU. So to actually make this fast, what you want to do is overlap as much as possible the computation of the layers plus this gathering of the parameters of the next layer you are about to compute. So to do this, we had to manually re-implement a couple of things, and we made a mistake in the gradient computation. It was a false gradient, so it didn't impact the first runs. A priori not much. But for the 65 billion parameter model, it actually did. So I think that at around, 1,000 billion, so 1 trillion token, the red curve initially was actually crossing the green curve. And we knew there was something wrong. And it was happening after, I think, 3 weeks of training during Christmas. It was horrible. So yeah, so I think we found this bug. We are pretty lucky to find it. We found it, we fixed it, we restarted. We were not sure if it was actually the reason it diverged, but actually it was. And then after we restarted it, it actually worked well. So yeah. So maybe, yeah, I think related to what Benjamin said before, when people estimate the price of the training of these models, they usually don't take into account that it actually takes a lot of time to get there. I mean, we actually worked, I think, 4 months before we started these final trainings. So even though the final model is maybe not so expensive, I mean, all the way to get there actually is actually much more expensive. So for the evaluation, it's actually a bit more complicated than before. Before it was very simple. You had for each task a data set with a training valid on test split. So you'll train on the training set, report the performance of the test split. Now it's a bit more complicated. I mean, a few years ago it was still okay. People, for instance, when they were training models like BERT, Roberta, XLM, what they will do is that they will train their model on their data set. Then you have some very common benchmarks that they will use. They will fine-tune their model and their benchmarks and report the accuracy on this. But it was still a bit noisy because sometimes you will do a better job at fine-tuning these benchmarks. So you might say your model is better initially, but maybe it's because you fine-tune it better than another one. So it started becoming complicated. And now it's really a mess because nobody is using the same data. Nobody wants to say what data they use. The fine-tuning is expensive, so you can't do that anymore. So what we do now is actually, I think, not so bad. We use this zero-shot evaluation metrics. So here is an example of one of them. So MMLU, it's a famous task. The idea is that you have a lot of questions split into 57 categories about mathematics, history, computer science, etc. And they're pretty difficult. So here is an example. I mean, you have some question about medicine, I guess. And you give this to your model, and you ask it to predict A, B, C, and D. And you look whether the model is accurate. So if you reply randomly, you have 25% chance of being successful. The average human is 34%. And actually, it's not easy to get a model that does better than 25%. And yeah, so here are the results we got at the end. So I'm not going to go into the details of all these tasks, but they are all the same thing. It's just a question. Sometimes it's sentiment classification. You have like a sentence, you see what the model wants to put afterwards. I mean, they are all the same thing, zero shot. And here what was interesting is that Llama, so here are the results of Llama, it was actually better than all of this other model, not everywhere, but on this common sense reasoning task it was actually really good, even sometimes better than the 500 billion parameter model of Palm of Google. Yeah, so something which is kind of controversial today is, can you trust this benchmark? If a model has a good accuracy on some benchmark doesn't mean it's good. And the problem is that these benchmarks are actually very sensitive. So for instance, before I was showing you a question and the answer was D, but there are many, what you try to do is see whether the model wants to predict A or predict B, C or D, but maybe the model wants to predict 4 minutes, that was the solution to the question, or maybe it wants to predict answer colon D or answer colon 4 minutes. And based on what you evaluate, you can actually get some very significant differences in performance. You can get sometimes like, I don't know, 5%, but 5% is a lot because if you look at, yeah, 5% is typically, I mean, if you look at some metrics like, I don't know, the last column, okay, maybe not this one, but okay, the middle one, ELA-SWAG, 3% is typically the difference you get between a llama and the llama of the next size. So if your metrics are noisy by 3%, and that this is the difference you have between two models that are twice larger, I mean, one being twice larger than the other, it's actually an issue. So to address this issue, I mean, now what we do is that we have some common repositories, some common GitHub that people use. And as long as you use the same code base to evaluate two models, it's usually fine. Yeah. And, but it's not always fine. Typically, when we released Llama, people didn't believe the results for many weeks. It was annoying because when people implemented, I mean, actually plugged Llama into these public benchmarks that there is, there was some issue in the tokenization, in the way the data was tokenized, and because of this, the results were off by 10%. So yeah, it took people a while to figure it out. And it's the issue that it's very difficult to find these bugs. Sometimes it's always some silent bugs. So yeah. So to address, I mean, to make these benchmarks a bit more stable, what we often do is that we use this few-shot evaluation. So few-shot is the same thing, same as before, except that you don't directly give the question and let the model predict the answer, but you give, if it's 5-shot, so for 5-shot evaluation, you give 5 examples of question 1, answer 1, question 2, answer 2, 5 times, and then you give your new question and you see whether your model predicts a good answer. And if you do this, so not only it improves the performance of your model, because you tell your model, you give it some examples of what you expect from it, so it understands the task, so then it actually does a better job at doing your task. And yeah, so the performance improves. So as you can see on this example, you go from 65 to 70 for the 33B Llama, but it's also much more stable. Yeah. So here some quick curves of the evaluation of the performance of the 4 Llama over time. So the violet curve is actually the performance of Chinchilla. And you can see the good metrics and the bad metrics. So the good metrics are the ones where when the model trains more, the accuracy increases, which is expected. There are also the metrics where, you expect the Llama which is larger to be better than the Llama which is smaller. So the metrics on the top are good. We usually like these ones. The Sika one at the bottom left is usually, you see that if you evaluate your model with that, it's not a good way to evaluate your model because you clearly have models that are better. The red one is supposed to be better, but it's not obvious if you report results on this metric. So that's why you can't. You need to have several metrics. In practice, I think in Llama we had like 20 or something. So yeah, so just to conclude, so some of the message some of the things we found and discovered when we worked on this project is that first of all, you should train much more than what is suggested by the Chinchilla paper. I think many people didn't understand what was in this paper and know there is even this concept of a Chinchilla trap. The idea is that you should train a model of this size and this number of tokens. So then even people, at some point, were releasing some new models saying this is Chinchilla optimal, but it's actually not a good thing to do. If you give model to people, you don't want your model to be Chinchilla optimal, because if it's Chinchilla optimal, it means that you actually stop the training when the loss was going down. And if the loss is going down, you don't want to stop the training, so you want to keep training. Yeah, the Chinchilla paper was overlooking the inference cost. It was just replying to the question on how many tokens do you want to use, assuming you have a fixed computational budget. But of course, at the end, you want to deploy your model. So if you want to deploy your model, you have to think about that as well. So you probably want to train longer, even if it's not the best, but then your inference will be cheaper. The other message was that you can train state-of-the-art models with publicly available data. You don't need to have some data, like some proprietary data set. We don't know what OpenAI is using or anything, but you don't need to have this ultra-clean data from we don't know where. If you just use internet, command crawl, that's good enough. You can get some very good models at least with that. And yeah, and if you overtrain, if you train longer, a 13 billion parameter model, Llama 13B, you actually can outperform even the original GPT-3 that was more than 10 times larger. And overall, even though we are a bit afraid of this project, it was actually very simple conceptually. There were a lot of engineering challenges and issues and annoying things like fixing the GPU crashes and everything. But overall, there were no secret sauce or anything really. At the end, the architecture we have is almost the same one from 2017. It was just a question of, I think, doing things properly and cleaning your data well. And yeah, but no real magic. So yeah, just wanted to thank the people, the other first author of the paper, so Hugo, Thibault, Gauthier and Edouard. And so very quickly, Llama 2. So Llama 2 was the same data set on architecture. It was trained longer on 2 trillion tokens. And what was interesting to see is that even if you train longer, you see that the performance still improves, which means that we train on 1.4, the Llama 1, 1.4 trillion tokens. But even at 1.4 trillion, you see that the model is not saturated, because even at 2 trillion, it's actually even better than the 1.4. So now the question that I think everybody was asking after Llama 2 was, how long can you go? Is it better after 4 trillion, 6 trillion tokens? How far can you push these numbers of these small models? And, yeah. So last very quick slide about Mistral. So we created Mistral in June 2023. What we do is that we train a large language model for businesses. We want these models to be small and efficient in the same spirit of Llama, because when you deploy models, you want them to be very fast. We have a focus on open source, and we released our first model today. So it was completely related to this event. I think it was a coincidence. We planned this. I think only 2 weeks ago. So just to show some numbers of Mistral 7B. So Mistral 7B is actually much better than Llama 2 13B. So here are some results on some benchmarks. It's actually the first model that exceeds 60% accuracy on MMLU, the benchmark I was showing just above. And yeah, it's also released under the Apache 2 license, which is a more flexible license than the one used by Meta for the Llama model. And it handles much longer sequences, up to 8K tokens. And we also added these new kernels for sliding attention window. So there are some details about this on the blog post we released. But the idea is that you can actually take into input sequences with up to a theoretical 128,000 tokens. So yeah, just some other results on different kind of categories. So there is MMLU, this science on kind of tasks, the knowledge, reasoning, and compression benchmarks. And you can see that the Mistral 7B is way above the Llama 2 13B, and it's also above the Llama 1 34B on any kind of categories. We did not have numbers for the Llama 2 30B because Meta did not release it, so we were not able to evaluate it with our benchmark. Yeah. Thank you.
Questions for Guillaume?
Thanks for the presentation. I have a question for the non-deterministic output for LLM. So we see that maybe it's by design. So even we ask the same question with same prompt, and we can get different results. And this is by design, and this can bring risks in business. So my question is this part of the measurement of LLM, and do you think it's a risk that we need to handle in the near future?
You mean, is it a risk, like if we put a model like this in production or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it depends on what you want to do. Typically, this question of determinism is also something we have in the evaluation. So typically, when you evaluate your model based on the task you use, you can actually make it deterministic. You can just actually make a greedy decoding, which is what we use for actually most of these benchmarks. Sometimes you want your model to generate many solutions because you are in a setup where you can verify if your solution is correct or not. For instance, I mean, there are some tasks like this where you have some unit tests, you just need to generate one solution that passes them. So you can actually sample many of them, and you actually, maybe like 100, and you just can actually score 1 point if you actually have one solution that passes this test. But otherwise, I think it really depends on the kind of application. I mean, I think if you are doing code generation, you probably want to actually sample many solutions if you think the first one is not satisfactory. If you're in a setup where you want the output to be very reliable, you probably want to have a temperature of 0, so to be greedy, to actually output the model most confident answer. So I think it really depends on the kind of task you are doing. I think if you want to use a model to get some creative content generation, to write like an article or rewrite a sentence, rephrase something, then you actually want to have a high temperature, generate different outputs. But for now, in terms of, I think safety you always have to manually inspect whatever you are generating. There is no, I think, real solution to address this for now.
What are the most exciting area of research, according to you, to keep improving this LLM currently? And maybe more specifically, what do you think about the mixture of experts approach that seems to be...
I'm sorry, who is talking? I can see.
Sorry, okay. It's me.
Sorry.
That seems to be implemented in GPT-4.
Sorry, I did not hear the second question.
Okay, what do you think about the mixture of experts architecture or approach that seems to be implemented?
So for me, the promising directions, I think, are around this idea of... so for now, I think a problem with current models is that if let's say you have a 7B model, it's extremely fast at decoding, much faster than a, let's say, 200 billion parameter model. But the problem is that you cannot... if you ask a complicated question to your model, it will generate an answer. If it's wrong, there is pretty much nothing you can do about it. And I think it's unfortunate you cannot tell your model, here is a question. You can think about it for 1 hour. You have an arbitrary amount of time. So think about it and output me the solution you think after 1 hour. I think it's a little bit like if you give a very complicated math problem to a student, maybe he will not find it on the spot, but maybe if you give them enough time, after 1 hour they will find a solution. And you don't have this idea at all in current LLMs. They just spit a solution, and if it's wrong, I mean, that's wrong. And so there have been some attempts, I think, to address these problems. For instance, the universal transformer, I think, is really nice. The idea is that you have an input, you forward it to your transformer, and then you have a classifier that says, I am ready to answer, so I'm going to give you a solution. Or it can tell you, I'm not ready, I need to think more. So if it needs to think more, it takes the output, reprocess it, and you can actually do this an arbitrary number of times. And I think it's very interesting because it basically means that, I mean, it doesn't make sense that if you ask a question to a model, it outputs a solution with the same reflection time, with the same thinking time, regardless of the difficulty of the question. If you ask a model what is 2 + 2, or can you solve this complex math problem, it will take the same time to output the solution, and I think it's not something you wish. And for the mixture of experts, I think it's something which is particularly useful if you put something into production. So these models are much more expensive to train, because typically if you have 16 experts, you have 16 more blocks of matrices to learn. So it takes longer to train. But the nice thing is that at inference, you actually have much more parameter available. So it's your model has much more knowledge. And something that also people don't realize with the mixture of experts, but which is actually really nice, is that in text, unlike in maybe some other domains, even though you only use one expert at each token, so you generate one word, you use one expert, then at the next word you might use another expert. So it means that even if you have 16 experts, on your model is, let's say, 16 experts of size 100 billion, you will use one expert per token. So if you generate a sequence, you might actually use all of them. So you might use maybe your 1.6 trillion parameter model, parameters, if you have 16 experts of 100 billion. So it's really nice. Yeah. It's just more difficult to train, more difficult to engineer. The problem, I think, the changes we had here were difficult, but they would have been worse with MOE. You have to really program things differently. And, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is, in Llama Benchmark, there was a column that is entitled Math. What does it mean? Like, is it related to the ability of the LLM to solve math problems, and can we do better?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Sorry.
Like there was a column in the Llama Benchmark that is entitled Math. What does it mean? Like, how can we measure this performance?
So for math, there are a few different data sets of evaluations. The most common is a data set that's just called math, actually. And the idea is that you have a bunch of questions that are actually pretty difficult. I mean, not IMO level, but still difficult. And these are questions, all of the form, it's not things like prove that this is true, or prove this, or prove that. It's questions of the form, compute the area of this, compute the angle between these two lines. It's questions where you have like typically a digit, or like an analytical, I mean, you have a solution which is like a formula. And what you do is that you basically ask your model the question, you make it generate a solution, and you see whether the model actually just outputs the solution. This is tasks that you do in a few shot tasks. So in a few shot you can give some example of input-output. On the output, the solution is always put in a box. So in the LaTeX, the LaTeX M box that says this is a solution. So then you basically tell the model to generate a solution, and then to highlight, I mean, to put in the box its solution. So you generate a solution, you look at it, and you compare it with the goal truth, and that's it. So what you can do is, what we do for this benchmark is that we sample typically, I think, 100 solutions, and you see if one of them is a sentence where the model generates something and that puts like the solution, the good solution, in one box. It's totally possible that you have some false positive. So for instance, the models kind of randomly figure out the solution. It happens, but that's how we do it. In practice, if the model, I mean, any model can do this, and it still remains like a good way to compare models. It's maybe not a perfect benchmark, but if you want to compare models together, it's good.
I think we have a few more questions that we'll try to take, but then we also have our startups. So I've seen you.
Thank you for the presentation. I read a paper that there will be somehow lack of data available for training. Did you try to generate with LLM some data to train other LLM?
Yeah, I think using so this will work only if you have a model. If you want to train a model smaller than the one that generates things, because if you have a small model and want to generate something, it will be something lower quality than what your higher model can learn. But if you actually are in this setup, what people typically do is distillation. So what you do is that you take your large model, and then when you train your small model, you don't train it to predict the next word, but the probability distribution of the next word according to your larger model. And it actually provides more information. It's a less sparse reward than, you don't say just predict this next word, you say predict this probability for this one, this probability for this one. So you actually learn faster and better. So that's typically what we do. Otherwise, using other models to train, synthetic data to train other models is something we do at fine-tuning. So when you do this RLHF kind of thing, supervised fine-tuning, you do that. What you do is that, for instance, you ask a question to your model. You can tell your model to generate, let's say, 10 answers. Then you will ask a human to select which answer is the best among the 10, and then you can actually fine-tune your same model on this selected answer. So that's how you actually train on your synthetic data, but that's only for fine-tuning.
Yes, thank you, Guillaume. I have a question about the data set as well. You've probably said it, but I didn't understand when you said Llama 1 was trained with 1 trillion tokens and GPT-3 with 3 billion tokens, if I remember well. The 1 trillion, is this because you had your data sets were 3 times bigger, or just because you did more epochs on it for the training part? And I have a second question about the datasets in the future, because the datasets will be in the future, for future models, they will gather data that will be crawled on the web. An increasing part of this data will be generated by AI, by ChatGPT and Mistral AI 7B and so on. And I've read a paper about the risk of the performance of future model collapsing if they train too much on less diverse data created by generative AI models. What do you think about this risk of collapse, and what is the need of fresh human data?
Yeah, I think, so for the first question, we did, so it's true that there are some data which is higher quality than other. Typically Wikipedia is the highest quality. Archive is also good, same for Stack Exchange. So typically what we do is that we do multiple epochs on this. So even if Wikipedia is, I don't know, 30 billion token, we will maybe train it 3 times on it and have 100 billion token. So we upsample what we think is high quality. So at the end of the day, we didn't have to do more than 1 epoch on Common Crawl because it was large enough. But yeah, the strategy is you don't like concatenate everything and then shuffle and do 1 pass and repeat if you need more tokens. You actually upsample. You generally just have you decide some proportion. So for instance, 4% Wikipedia, 3% archive, 4% GitHub, and then you train with this proportion. And it can be that maybe you will do 1-2 epochs on some data sets, but that's you don't think, I think, as much in terms of epochs as in terms of data distribution. Yeah. In particular for this, we actually just took the data distribution provided by Chinchilla. Yeah, we wanted to be as close as possible to what was the state of the art at the time. Yeah. For the second question, yeah, I think it's really an issue indeed that probably in the future most of the internet content will be generated by these large language models, and if you have a text you don't even know where it comes from. And I think what's even more annoying is that I mean, OpenAI probably will know because you can easily watermark your generations, and if it's watermarked you can actually identify this is something I generated or not, but some other people will not be able to do this. So we don't know yet, I think, if it's an issue. But if it is, I mean, some companies will know what to exclude, and some will not know. So it's probably it might be an issue. Yeah, but I think I'm not too worried necessarily because in a way, this data selection is kind of a RLHF already, in the sense that you take your whatever model you have, you ask a question. Let's say you make your model generate an article. I think it's unlikely people will just copy paste it on their webpage. They will modify it, improve it. If it's perfect, they might just copy paste it, but then it means it's perfect. So why not just train on this? So I think my hope at least is that this data that will be coming from LLMs has been manually curated and selected by humans beforehand. So it should be high quality, and I think it's safe to train on that, hopefully.
Thank you, Guillaume. I had a question on the performance of Llama. So you said you were using, like, architectures have not changed that much since 2017, and you were still able to beat Palm with one order of magnitude less, 65 against 480 billion parameters there. So I was wondering, what do you believe was the key there to the success? Was it the data set? Was it the tokens? Was it the training time or schedule?
I can't know for sure, but I think it's mostly the data set. So Palm is so Google is never very clear about the data they use. And I think for Palm, 50% of the data set was composed of one data source called social conversation, but nobody knows what it is. And I suspect it was not very high quality. You might want to train on content with more information, maybe more documents that will help you to do some reasoning, mathematical reasoning. Maybe on social conversation you don't touch a lot of these science kind of topics which are reflected in the benchmarks. So I think that's mostly the data set. I forgot how much they trained. I don't know if they released this information, but I suspect a model this large, they obviously did not train as long as Llama. You cannot train a 500 billion parameter model this long. Maybe they can now, but at the time they probably didn't do it. And, yeah, I think it was mostly that. In terms of architecture, there were a few differences between what we did on Palm, but I don't believe it could have been the explanation.
All right, so Guillaume will be here at least for a short while at the cocktail, so you can ask him your remaining questions. I've seen a few, so thanks a lot. Thanks, Guillaume, for your presentation.